ultimately, when somebody goes from having a practice to really building a business, is having systems and processes that can be scaled, right? And this is really when you look at, McDonald's. In theory, you can take a 16-year-old kid, you tell him, you give him the manual, the standard operating procedures, and they're written in a way where, they can go and run that McDonald's and make a profit, because all they're doing is they're following systems and processes that have been proven. I think a lot of advisors have systems and processes, but maybe they're not written down. And again, I find this, we worked with a lot of advisors that help business owners, and that's what they're telling their business owners, that that's what they need to do around their finances and everything. And then we go, well, are you doing this in your business? Right? And so often we find that, a lot of advisors don't really have systems and processes, standard operating procedures set up.
Welcome to episode 30 of the Innovating Advice Show. I'm joined by Daniel Hanzelka, co-founder of Traffic and Pipelines. Daniel has been a financial advisor for 25 years and has been frustrated at times thinking he was doing the right thing, only to get the wrong results. In this episode, we're talking through the 3 big things Daniel wished he had learned earlier in his career. He also shares how he now helps advisors avoid those same pitfalls and build thriving businesses. Links to everything we mention and show notes are at innovatingadvice.com/episode 30. You're listening to the Innovating Advice Show, and I'm your host, Kate Holmes, bringing you the global pulse on financial services innovation, featuring financial planners, financial advisors, and related professionals from all corners of the globe. Let's dive in. Hi, Daniel. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Kate. Appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to our conversation.
And we've got a lot to chat about, Daniel. I really want to talk through your experience in the industry. You entered in back in the 90s, coming through the insurance side. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about is touching on the things that you wish you had known. That old, like, if you could go back and tell your younger self some things, we're going to be talking about sort of 3 high-level areas and how you have turned that around to now help other advisors create and have the experience that you wish you had had. So the first thing, and this has really been a theme coming through a number of podcasts over the last few weeks, is focusing on understanding your why and questioning the status quo. And we've got a lot of different angles to take, even just this first part. But let's start with kind of the path that people take in terms of progressing their career and matching it with getting various designations, qualifications, licenses, and talking through what you wish you had known as you were going through that process.
You know what, from the perspective of why, and I know that there's been a lot of written on that, and I think most people, most advisors understand or have heard a recording from Simon Sinek when he talks about, having your why. I tend to take it a little bit more further kind of to the next step and saying, hey, you know what, if you can get your potential clients to understand that they are your why, it becomes even easier. But I think most advisors, including myself, and I've spoken to a lot of advisors as you have, I kind of call them, first of all, accidental advisors. Nobody really sat there before and said, hey, I'm going to, at 9 years old, I'm going to be a financial advisor. There may be some if their father wasn't a financial advisor, so I don't want to, take it down there. And I know, and I have spoken to a few advisors that it was like, no, this was kind of planned. I wanted to do this. I went to school and this is what I wanted to do. And it's fascinating because most people that have had done that, they actually have had some type of an experience around finances. Maybe, the parents, had either good or bad experience with finances or something, and they just want to go out there and make a change. And I think that's, really great for a lot of advisors, if they have been in that place. But unfortunately, I think most advisors have kind of become the accidental advisor where, like myself, I kind of got recruited into the business. And then they kind of become what I call an accidental business owner, because ultimately, I think most advisors are more of a contractor, even if they're working for a company. They're not an employee. They're kind of treated sometimes as an employee, but they're really a business owner. And I think there's a huge difference when it comes down to being a business owner with the mindset of an employee and being a business owner with the mindset of a business owner. And if you're asking me, what do I wish that I knew, is knowing that distinction between being a kind of a business owner with the mindset of an employee as opposed to really saying, no, hey, you know what, I am a business owner. How does a business owner think? Because there's a huge difference between those, those two things. So, from the perspective, again, going back to the question you asked, is just knowing the distinction between, what, now that I'm an advisor, what does it really mean? And asking myself, not only what's the purpose and why am I doing this, but what, if I am building a business, what are those things and tools that I need to actually go and build a business? And I think that, unfortunately, the financial services has done a poor job of equipping advisors with that, those tools and teaching us how to actually be a business owner.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were talking in the pre-chat that that's not even unique to financial services. It happens in so many areas that you go to business for, that you go to university for. And I shared that I got my degree in photography, and that was a huge problem there, is a lot of photographers will start their own business, and great, how to, make great images, and the thing you don't learn is how to actually build a business around that. How do you run a business around that? And I know in your journey, Daniel, one of the things you were thinking as you went through is one of the things that you thought would help grow your business, and coming from that, accidental advisor standpoint and the mindset of that, was getting your CFP certification. And thinking, okay, once I get this certification, that is going to be this, part of a magical formula to help build my business.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And again, part of that was, again, great education from the perspective of working in the business.
Yep.
Really didn't help working on the business. And again, this is kind of the distinction of, becoming the best financial advisor that I possibly can. And I think a lot of, I think most advisors, that's their goal. That's what they want to do. And that's great. But being the best technician doesn't guarantee you're going to be successful as a business owner. And again, I think this is where it comes down to, where, becoming better and better at what somebody's doing doesn't guarantee that you can actually grow your business. And again, those were some of the misconceptions, going back to, I wish I knew that, because when I got my CFP, and we spoke about this before, I kind of got it for all the wrong reasons. I thought, okay, now that I get the CFP, that's going to change my business, because now I'm going to be, call it a professional, right? I'm actually designation. But unfortunately, what I found, that most of my clients didn't really care, and people that I met on this, new people coming in, they didn't even understand what that was. And I'm kind of sitting there going like, well, hang on, I thought this is really going to make an impact on, again, working on my business. But again, I realized that it was more of becoming better, of working in the business, being a better, if I use the words employee, because again, getting better and better at the thing that really doesn't make a difference in growing my financial practice.
Yeah, and that's not an uncommon thing that we see. And I've talked with advisors all over the world, and I've even questioned people. And when I was going through the CFP certification myself, and I shared this with you earlier, and I shared this story with a number of CFP professionals, that there were a number of times where I almost didn't continue with the process. And it was because when I was going through the training portion, it was like a week-long exam prep course. And so we were all in a different state. I was meeting advisors from a lot of the really big banks. And we got in some heated arguments where they were saying their whole reason for obtaining CFP certification was so that they could sell more insurance. And it was so fascinating to me, because that could not have been further from why I was obtaining it. But it gets exactly back to that. What is your why? And I mean, I still have my CFP certification. I've maintained it even while not practicing. I worked so hard to get it. The technical side of it is incredibly valuable. I was fascinated with what I learned, but it's exactly that. Why are you getting it? Yeah. And if you're getting it so that you can sell more products, or so that you think clients are magically going to come to you, that's probably not the right why. And either you're going to be disappointed, or, maybe not be setting the right example for other people coming in.
And I think, again, absolutely nothing wrong with getting the CFP designation. And I love the distinction. Hey, what's the purpose? What's the why? And is the why aligned with the outcome that you're expecting to get? And that's kind of what happened with me. It wasn't. I mean, I pretty well took a year off, didn't even go to family events and things, because I knew how important it was to go and get the designation and to actually pass the final exam. But then there was that bit of a letdown, going like, well, now that I have it, now what? Right. Yeah. And I think this is often what happens, unfortunately, with advisors. And I think the challenge that I see within the financial industry is that you essentially have, and I kind of put these 4 different levels of advisors. And again, we all start at the beginning where, we're kind of more of a salesperson. Again, we're kind of pushing the products and just selling the products. And unfortunately, a lot of advisors never get out of there because they don't recognize that there's a difference between sales and marketing. And so the next level that I usually call is the advisor that's more at that, more of a marketing advisor. Now that advisor is actually building what I would call more of a, financial practice where, it's not just maybe them, they might have somebody else that they're working with, but they start to recognize that, it's not just selling products, it's maybe giving more of a service and providing services. And it's not about just going out there and, like I said, pushing, hey, do you want to buy insurance? One of the coaches that I'm working with, he calls it, the menu advisor, right? When you have these advisors that meet somebody new and they, pull out like in a restaurant, a menu saying, hey, what service do you need? Right. And again, this is unfortunately what a lot of advisors' websites look like, right? I mean, it's kind of a menu of different products, and they're like hoping that when they put this information out there, something's going to interest that person, and they're going to say, "Yes, I'll have, I'll have that, or I'll have this." But again, they're not really building a business from that perspective, and that's kind of where I found myself. When I woke up one morning and realized I thought I was building a business, but really I had a job. Because really, when you start looking at a business and a definition of business, and I was speaking with somebody, really the definition of business is to get clients and to keep clients and keep on growing. And it's having systems and processes in it. And I started to realize that, they taught me of going out there, get clients and keeping clients, but it was for almost the wrong reasons. It was like, hey, as soon as you meet somebody, find out, where's their money, where they have it, how can I get my hands on it, and how can I keep it? Well, you know what, in this day and age, and again, I've been out of the industry for a while, so haven't had that conversation, but I know that that's not what people want. They never wanted that. And that's why it's all about, hey, do you want to just, be a salesperson? Do you just want to kind of have a financial practice? Or do you actually want to have a business where ultimately you can become what we call the CEO advisor, where you become the CEO of your business? And if you do choose to exit out of the business, you're not just selling it for the asset under management, you're actually potentially selling your business as a going concern, where it's not just even based on the relationships, but you're actually selling it because you actually have a company, you have a business that somebody actually wants to take over. And ultimately you become a lifestyle advisor, where the business is supporting your lifestyle instead of you supporting the business and being in the business 24 hours a day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know one of the other challenges that we see time and time again, and there are endless debates around, do you niche down? Do you work with everyone? Do you work with anyone that you like? And one of the things that you went through that was also kind of in that same time period of, hey, I got the CFP designation, was it the right thing to do? And trying to figure out what your path was, is you went from being a specialist to being a generalist. And there's that area where you should actually stay a specialist and not try to be everything to everyone.
And actually getting my CFP, again, it was another thing that I could put, kind of my quicker that I can pull out. Now I can do financial plans, which again, I was doing financial plans before, but now I'm certified. I'm actually designated to go and do them, and I can go and do this. And it became more of a distraction, where the first year in the business, just to keep the story short, I was an expert because all I could do was sell disability insurance, working with, contractors, and I have a way how to get them, all of it cold calling, but I was actually relevant to them because every time I talked to a contractor, I had a question for them that I would ask, hey, Joe, if you couldn't go to work, for 6 months, what would happen to your family? And became fairly successful. But then, when I became a generalist, because I could offer now life insurance, investments, and I got my CFP, and the conversations were not targeted. Now I could work with a lot of people and I could offer a lot of services. And that actually, I would call it backfired, because I became going from a specialist to a generalist. And it's really important for advisors to start to focus on and figure out, hey, what is it that you enjoy? Who do you enjoy working with? And how can you actually build those relationships where, when you look at the individuals that are more successful, even when we're looking at the medical field, the surgeons, the brain surgeon is going to be making more money in how they run their business than a general practitioner. And again, that same thing can work, with financial advisors.
It does. And you can get so caught up in, okay, well, now I have this person who wants to work with me, but now I have to learn about their situation. And, oh, okay, this person came to me, so I have to learn about their situation. And you become mentally and time-wise spread so thin that you're not really providing amazing service to anyone. And that can just be emotionally draining.
Yeah. Well, in essence, you're running, and I'll use the example, if you're dealing with business owners and you're dealing with, let's say, individuals, and I know that individuals can be business owners, but let's just, families, let's just say, well, in essence, you're building two separate businesses.
Yeah.
Right? Because all of your marketing towards the business owners are going to be irrelevant to young families. And all the things that you're doing for young families, yeah, there might be some crossover, but you're essentially trying to build two things. And ultimately, for you as an advisor, your goal is really to understand your clients so you know what their problems or challenges are. And in that way, you will become a lot more effective in what you do and how you do it. And this is, I think, the biggest part that a lot of advisors don't understand, that, yeah, the more you specialize, the more opportunities you actually create, where, most advisors think, no, if I just start working with less people, that means there's less opportunities. No, there's going to be more opportunities that are created by that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have kind of a 3-part saying, I believe. It starts with A being audience.
Audience, yeah. We call it the AOV framework, and it's basically what you need in order to really succeed in business. You need to have the A stands for audience, like very specific audience. And the more specific it is, the more of a specialist you're going to become, because you're actually going to become somebody that's going to become well known as working with those individuals. The O stands for offer. Ultimately, you need to have an offer that's relevant to your audience. And again, very specific. Like if you're working with, let's say you're working with doctors or even dentists, and you know what, the ones that are just, exited out of school, they're going to have different problems than somebody that has been in business for 20 years.
Yeah.
Again, even within doctors, you can kind of specialize who you're working with, or at least the offers you're putting in front of somebody can be a lot more specialized, because you know that if a doctor just graduated, they're going to have a huge amount of student debt. Well, how are they dealing with this and running a business? Well, there's possibly certain solutions or certain ideas that you can share with them compared to a doctor that's, maybe thinking of exiting their business, right? So the A stands for audience, the O stands for offer, and then ultimately you need to have a vehicle. You need to have a way how you can systematically get in front of these individuals. And it becomes, it has become a lot easier. I mean, we have, tools, and, LinkedIn is a database, and ultimately LinkedIn is a place where you can go out there and start find your audience. Again, but you need to become specific. Most advisors kind of connect with anybody and everybody, and they can't carry on a conversation because they don't know how to become relevant to them. And a lot of advisors come to us and say, Daniel, what we need is more leads. We need more connections. I said, listen, you don't need more leads. You need more conversions. You need to have more relevant conversations with your audience, because you probably already have 1,000, 1,500, or even 2,000 connections, but did you actually have conversations with those individuals? And most advisors have not, because they're just looking, how do I get a lead? But they don't know what to do with it, right?
Yep. Yeah. And so the third, and what you've touched on throughout, but the biggest one is really building a business. And when we talked a week or so ago, you started talking about the language around the fact that we call it a practice. And that has sat with me since then. I was like, you're right. We do constantly talk about building a practice, not about building a business.
And again, very good distinction that you kind of caught up to that. And again, this is where it comes down to. We're not practicing. I mean, we are, but it's, a bit of a play on words. But ultimately, I think every advisor wants to really, and is passionate helping their clients. Right? And again, it's all about, how do you actually turn more professional? How do you actually go and, not that advisors are not professionals, not that they're not, but how do you start to have the distinction of actually, going from just having a practice to actually having a business and ultimately building a company? And often we meet with advisors that have been successful, that are in, in mixed high 6 figures or even in 7 figures as far as what they're providing, but they're still not really having a business. It's kind of a mash of a whole bunch of things, because a lot of times we speak to advisors and they have built a successful, a practice or having a business where it's all built through referrals. Again, the challenge with that is, I mean, those are great individuals you can connect with, but often you might find out that they might not be the right client, or they're not coming in systematically. So ultimately, when somebody goes from the, having a practice to really building a business, is having systems and processes that can be scaled, right? And this is really when you look at, McDonald's. In theory, you can take a 16-year-old kid, you tell him, you give him the manual, the standard operating procedures, and they're written in a way where, they can go and run that McDonald's and make a profit, because all they're doing is they're following systems and processes that have been proven. I think a lot of advisors have systems and processes, but maybe they're not written down. And again, I find this, we worked with a lot of advisors that help business owners, and that's what they're telling their business owners, that's what they need to do around their finances and everything. And then we go, well, are you doing this in your business? Right. And so often we find that, a lot of advisors don't really have systems and processes, standard operating procedures set up, even for things like, hey, how do you actually start to generate, conversations? Do you have a lead generation system, right? Do you have things that you have put into place that runs systematically and you can actually scale it? And I think these are some of the challenges that a lot of advisors haven't really taken the time and done.
So I would say probably one of the things around, if you're thinking about, okay, is this a business or is it a practice, could it be the McDonald's model? Could it be, if you as the owner take a sabbatical for 6 months, can the business still run the way it should run? Are those things written down, or is it all completely reliant on what is inside your brain?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, we're talking about advisors. I remember when I was an advisor, one of the questions that I would ask business owners, that, we would have a kind of a meeting with all the people, all the parties that were involved, and even family. And I would say, okay, Joe, you go and sit in the corner now. You just died, and you're no longer part of this conversation. And I would turn to everybody else and ask them, now what? Yeah. And Joe from the corner would start telling them what they should be saying. And I'm like, oh, no, you're not here anymore. And again, it was only at that point that Joe, the business owner, started to realize, going like, oh, they don't know, because we never sat down, never had that conversation. We never went into a place where, if I'm no longer around, what's going to happen? And again, those are the things I think that advisors often help their clients. But again, because they're working in the business, but they kind of forget to look at their business and making sure that they have actually gone through that.
Yeah.
And I have one client that actually just recently read the book Profit First. And he shared with me that completely changed the view on how he looks at business. And he's been in business for the last 30 years, have done a lot of things, but he realized that, the business always came first, even with his own personal finances. And it was like, hang on, how do we start looking at how do we actually treat everything? And he started paying himself first, and made a huge difference in his business. And again, he's been an advisor for quite a few years. So these are all of the things that we're so focused on working in our business that we don't look at how to work on our business. And that's really the important part.
Yeah. Well, and I'll link to that book. I always love knowing what books people value, what's out there. There's so much good content, but especially as we all are home now, have to find ways to entertain ourselves. I love reading anyway, but I've definitely been reading more in this lockdown. So I'll link to that book, Profit First. And so in terms of what you are building now to help advisors, and when you talk about lead generation, I think my brain tends to go to an outdated thing, and you've alluded to not doing this, but lead generation, it shouldn't be paying a company that is going to, you're going to buy 10,000 random leads from.
Oh, for sure. And I think this is where the challenge is. I mean, advisors don't understand that ultimately the financial services is all about building relationships, right? And when it comes down to getting in front of more individuals, there's really only one of two ways of doing it. You either do it more organic for free, or you do it more where you pay, right? So there's paid ways of doing this, and this has been around, like, billboards, radio, TV. Now we're talking more about Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads, or Google ads, or doing it that way. The free, again, is a way of doing it more organic way. And again, this has been done in the past. Referrals. Going to networking events, right? Kind of in a digital way. And the way that we are helping advisors to do this is using tools. And again, we look at LinkedIn as a tool. Essentially, it's a database. And if you know who you want to work with, you can start to build those relationships with those individuals. You can start to connect with the right individuals on LinkedIn. And even on LinkedIn, there are many different ways of doing that. Connecting with your ideal clients, building centers of influence, speaking to people in media, right? And again, even on LinkedIn, there is doing it through the messaging where you're connecting with people, and then there is posting content. And again, there are so many different ways of doing this. And I think a lot of advisors kind of get confused of which way is the better way. And I often get a question, hey, Daniel, is LinkedIn better than Facebook? And I say, well, it all depends. What is it that you want to do? We're back to the first question saying, hey, what's that why? What's the outcome that you want?
Yeah.
And one of the biggest lessons that I've learned going and becoming kind of, being a financial advisor, becoming a marketer, is there is a lot of noise out there and a lot of different ways how to do things. Again, it all comes down to ultimately what is the outcome. And unfortunately, a lot of the advice that's being given out there is maybe given to advisors in the wrong way, meaning that you can't take an advice. It's kind of like going to a doctor, what we call a malpractice, where you go to the doctor and he doesn't ask you any questions, just gives you a prescription. And ultimately, this is what's happening in the marketing world, and that's the reason why we're kind of doing what we're doing. You alluded to questions. One of the best books that I've written, in the name of the book is I think it's One Thing. I don't know if it's the one thing it's the One Thing, I think is the name of it. And this really comes down to what we were talking about. The AOV method kind of came out of it and all of this stuff. Ultimately, in order for you to have success in any business, not just as a financial advisor, you need to have clarity on one audience. Who is that one audience that you can go in front, get in front of? You also need to have, and going back to the AOV, you need to have one offer, really one message. What is that message that's really truly going to resonate with your audience? And again, if you have a really great solution that only works for, not necessarily only works for dentists, but you can find out that, hey, if dentists is that audience and you have a solution that can really help them, well, start talking about that. Start telling them that if they don't have, or if they do have this problem, that there is a solution so that you can become relevant to them. So it's really one audience, one message. Again, then we're going for one vehicle. Again, you need to have a way how to actually put that message in front of your audience on a consistent basis. And then ultimately, I talk about, give yourself at least 1 quarter or even 1 year to keep on doing that over and over again. I think the biggest challenge that advisors have, and I was part of that, is where we would every year, I would every year look for a new marketing, new different way how to do things that would never stick with anything long enough. So ultimately, the way we help advisors, we help them in 2 ways, where we have a program, we call it the FUN method, where ultimately it's building the foundation, going through the AOV method, making sure that they have an understanding who their audience is, what is the offer. The vehicle is kind of the next step in the FUN method, is the U, is the uncover the traffic, right? Where are those individuals that you want to build a relationship with? And then the N stands for nurture. Now that we have found the audience, we have a way we can engage them. We need to nurture them. When you meet somebody, they're not ready to buy from you right away. Very small percentage are ready to do something right now. So you need to actually educate them. What we find that most business owners don't even know what problems or challenges they have. And again, it's up to the advisor to start nurture them, to start to educate them and help them to recognize the challenges that they have. And ultimately, the D in the FUN method stands for delegate. I mean, you don't have to do this yourself. And I think when we have created the programs for advisors, we looked at it this way. Hey, you know what? We know that there are some advisors that they want to kind of do it on their own, and we can help them with that. But ultimately, you as an advisor, if you really want to position yourself as an expert, as an authority, you really need to focus, as we were talking about, but you really need to focus on becoming the expert on your clients. You don't need to become an expert on marketing.
Yep.
And what we do in all of our programs, we actually teach you kind of the frameworks. We teach you what we're doing, but we're also going to go out there and do it for you, because ultimately, you as an advisor should really only be doing the things that you are licensed for. Right? You don't need to become a marketing guru, spend so much time and effort learning how to do all of these things. Ultimately, you make money and you're the best when you're in front of your clients. The same way you're probably talking to your clients and telling them, hey, you know what? And I use this example. I had one client that was a doctor, where I told them, you know what, Dr. Joe, you know what? I've never met a doctor that became, financially successful or sustained by investing in the stock market on their own. They made the money being a doctor and being an expert at what they were doing, and they worked with somebody else that managed all of their finances so that they can focus on and keep on becoming more specialized doctor, doing the things that they're good at so that they can make money in their business and working with an expert that can help them to manage that. And ultimately, this is how we work with advisors. Most advisors, I think, if they didn't have to, they wouldn't be, doing a lot of the marketing and trying to figure that stuff on their own.
Yeah.
But again, because they don't understand that, they spend so much time and effort on learning things that they might never go out there and implement and actually do something about it.
Yeah. It's tough to let go, and it's tough to both try to figure it all out, and it's tough to delegate. It's
100%. I think you know what, often when I meet a coach and they ask me, hey, what's the biggest challenge in your business? And I think this is relevant to everybody. And I always say, listen, I look at it every single day in the mirror when I wake up. It's me. I'm the one that's holding my business down because, again, what you just mentioned, it's difficult to delegate. It's difficult to go these things and build them. And again, it takes time and effort to actually build a good, solid team that you can go and move from that, maybe a solo advisor where you're just kind of doing the sales, to actually building a company. But there are some systematic steps how that can be done. And ultimately, this is what we've done, where we tell advisors, I mean, in order for you to build that, business as a company, you need to have a marketing system. You need to have a lead generation system. And again, and I appreciate you saying that, like lead generation almost sounds like a dirty word, almost like sales often. But ultimately, that's what it comes down to. If you have a business and you don't have a systematic way how to get in front of your ideal clients, you don't really have a business. You kind of have a side hustle and you're just hoping you're going to run into somebody. But that's often the first thing where we start with advisors, is start telling them, hey, how do you get in front of your ideal clients? How many phone calls, how many follow-ups, how many new potential clients have you, reached out to this week? That's what's going to make the difference in you actually making sales. And that's ultimately what advisors need to focus on, is working on their business from the perspective of going out there and creating more, new opportunities.
Yeah. And going back to that specialist thing, do you even know who your ideal client is? And Daniel, thinking about kind of your experience and being in bigger banks or bigger organizations before, what advice would you have to people that are in large organizations that aren't running their own business or practice? How can they start to implement some of this stuff? Because when I talk with them, even when it comes to posting on LinkedIn, sometimes the compliance hurdles are so big that they can't even do that.
Well, what we do actually at Traffic and Pipelines, we focus on the relationship. And often when it comes out of compliance, and what we have worked with advisors that have worked at some of the bigger places, we always tell them, when you go to the compliance officer, just tell them, listen, LinkedIn, all it is a database. LinkedIn, what I want to use it for is build the relationships. I'm not trying to sell products. I'm not trying to, give advice until I actually know what somebody's situation is, right? So often I think the reason compliance has an issue with social media is maybe a little bit from the past, because it was a bit of a, wild, wild west. Everything kind of went and people were really focusing, trying to sell. We tend to look at social media more from the perspective of reaching out to individuals and building one-on-one relationships. And there is a way of doing it a little bit more manually, right? Ultimately, just going out there and reaching out. Again, not saying, hey, look at me, I'm a financial advisor, I have something to sell you. But again, it's all about positioning yourself as an authority. And if, let's say that you do work with engineers, because maybe that's your background and those are the clients that you work with, start making it a little bit more what we call, we call it a spotlighting, where you kind of say, hey, this is the audience I want to work with. Hey, how can I kind of learn more about them? How do I know what their problems or challenges are? How do I learn more from the perspective of I'm going to use the word, how can I get inside of the head of my potential clients so I know what their problems are? Those are the type of messages that we would go out there and put out there and go to compliance and ask them if they're okay with this, because we're not talking about advice. We're saying, hey, you as an architect, do you have these challenges? We were talking about, doctors that are, just got out of school. Start talking about it, exposing some of the problems that they might have. Hey, you as a brand new doctor, do you have challenge how to pay off for your debt? Hey, you know what? Would you be open to having a conversation where, I can show you a couple of strategies and a couple of ideas around that? Again, those are the things where, social, and there is even a word that's called social selling. Really, the selling you're doing is not selling the products. The selling is you're selling a relationship. You're really selling yourself. And hey, how can we go and build a relationship? How can we build that know, like, and trust factor with somebody? So we never talk about specific products, never talk about specific solution, meaning like, hey, you need an insurance for this, or you need an investment, because that's usually where compliance has an issue with that. So start focusing more on how you can go out there and build a relationship and build a stronger relationship with somebody. And again, that's difficult to do, when you're dealing with a wide variety of individuals.
Yep.
Right? This is, again, where we're back to the AOV method, right? Well, who's the audience, and more specific, the better. What is the offer? And again, the offer, really the first offer is, hey, is there a potential to even have a conversation? When we're talking about the offer, it's not like, hey, how can I provide you with a solution? Especially on social media, most times the offer is, hey, how do I even get somebody's attention? How do I get them to engage with me? How do I get them into a conversation? So it's never really talking about the product itself.
And what about for people that are in large organizations where they do have, I'll say, that traditional lead generation of, hey, here are 100 leads. I cannot believe we still have cold calling happening in 2020, but it still exists. Yeah. Go out there and cold call or follow up on these random leads. What advice would you have to them about how can they start to find their audience? I mean, do they need to leave the organization they're at, or is there some way they can start to incorporate that within the confines of a larger organization?
I think, from the perspective of, what somebody should do, really what they need to ask themselves is, hey, what am I, where do I see myself long-term? Is this something that I'm, we're going to be here for the next 1 or 2 years to kind of get myself through this? Or is this something more of a long-term? And a lot of advisors, again, it's very difficult to go and be independent and start from scratch. So I know a lot of advisors start with larger organizations, they learn things and then they leave. You know what? That may be the option. I also have spoken to a lot of advisors that are at larger firms and they're very successful. Again, it just all depends. I know for me, when I worked for a large organization, it just wasn't for me. And I chose to go out there and become independent. It has its advantages. It has its disadvantages. When you're on your own, again, we go back to that. Now you're really on your own. You kind of have to motivate yourself and do all of those things, from the perspective of we shared when I started in the business. Part of my success is because I was part of an organization. They were doing the motivating and everything for me. When I went on my own, I didn't have a manager. I didn't have anybody that told me, hey, go out there and start making the phone calls. I had to kind of self-motivate myself. But I think for advisors that are kind of at the larger places, again, start with that question you asked at the beginning. What's the why? Or like, why am I doing this?
Yep.
And again, if where you are at, it resonates with you, well, let's now just find out, hey, how can we make it work at whatever you're experiencing? Like, even when you mentioned cold calling, and listen, that's how I went and built my business. Is it the best way to do that? Probably not. If that's the only way you can do it, I've received this one advice from a coach that he says, listen, a cold call is only a cold call in the first call. If you actually call somebody and you get their voicemail and you leave a message, again, a well-scripted message. Now, when you call the second time, you're following up. It's not a cold call anymore. You're actually building a relationship. And there is this number that I've heard a lot of marketers are using right now. It's 7-11-4. The 7 stands for if somebody will go out and check you out. And in this day and age, when you meet somebody, they're not going to believe what you tell them to do. They're going to believe what Google tells them about you.
Yes.
Is there roughly about 7 hours worth of information that can somebody actually go out there and watch of you? And I know that a lot of advisors working at the larger firms, they might not even record videos. They might not do anything. Again, just building those relationships. But that's what people are looking for. In order for somebody to become a client, right, they will probably spend up to 7 hours of watching your content. It will probably take about 11 different touches, meaning that you sending them a LinkedIn message, or you sending them an email, or sending them a series of emails and LinkedIn. It will probably take about 11 of those touches in order for them to you get their attention. So when you're going back to cold calling, if you just called somebody once and you don't get a hold of them and you don't leave a message, you know what, that doesn't even count as one touch. It might take you calling them 11 times and leaving 11 messages, because now you're building a relationship. Like, they're actually going like, wow, this guy is really, consistent. He's really persistent. You're actually speaking to them and they're already forming an opinion who you are and how you work. And again, it's what's the overall strategy behind everything. So it's a matter of kind of doing things over and over again. And the 4 in the 7-11-4, what that stands for is have 4 different ways how you communicate with someone. So even if you're cold calling, if you call them and you leave a message, if you, for an example, know that they're on LinkedIn, well, send them out a invitation to connect with you on LinkedIn, or send them an email on LinkedIn. If you have their email address, send them an email, right? Find different ways how to communicate, because it all comes down to familiarity. And every single one of your clients, before they became your client, ultimately they were a stranger. Somehow you got introduced to them, you build a relationship, and they became your client. So even when you're doing some of these, methods that we're talking about, cold calling, if they're done in a proper way, they can still work. They're a lot more tougher to do in this day and age. But again, ultimately, you need to get creative with your marketing and figure out a way how you can do something. And if you're talking about books, there's another book that completely changed how I operate. And the name of the book is Prosperous Coach, written by Rich Litvin and Steve Chandler. And it's a coaching book, but he talks about this concept, client creation. And I remember the first time I heard that, I'm like going, how do you go out there and create clients? No, you just go out there and you buy a list of leads and you just, but he started talking about this way, like if there is ultimately, and let's just say that you really love working with architects, right? Well, go and find out as much about architects as you possibly can, then maybe go on LinkedIn and start connecting with them. But find out as much about you can about that person. So when you actually call them, you're not calling as a stranger, you're calling them as somebody that you know their problems, you know their challenges, and you can have a conversation where maybe at the end of the conversation, they'll be like, wow, Daniel, I finally feel like you understand me. I finally feel like you're the first advisor that understands what my problems and challenges are. And this is ultimately how you can go and create clients, is because your client essentially is somebody that you know more about them than they know about themselves. And again, you can only do this when you work with a specific audience, when you really know who those individuals are. That's primarily why we only work with financial advisors. What we can do when it comes down to LinkedIn and marketing, we can do that with coaches, consultants, with mortgage brokers. We specifically work with advisors because we know what their problems and challenges are. We know what they're thinking. We know what their pain is, because we're advisors turned marketers, right? And I think this is where, advisors really need to start looking at things. You really need to get to know your audience and get to know, who they are and how you can help them. Because, and especially in this day and age, I think right now is the biggest opportunity for financial advisors when it comes to marketing, because all they need to do is reach out to people, start a conversation, and just ask them, hey, is there any way that I can help you? And, it's a simple question, but people right now need advisors more than ever because they're so confused with all of these different, government packages, what they need to do with these things. They need help and they don't know how this situation is going to all play out. And if the advisor is just simply going out there and is visible, and every advisor for sure needs to be calling their clients and asking that question, hey, how can I help you? Is there anything I can do? And they need to go out there and start to, start generating new conversations with potential clients and asking that same question.
Definitely. Well, Daniel, this has been fantastic. You provided a lot of food for thought. Speaking of LinkedIn, definitely included your LinkedIn connection below. And you mentioned a number of programs that you guys do. So your website is linked below so advisors can check that out as they're thinking about, hey, I do need to actually start working on my business and create a business and become that CEO advisor and know that I'm creating something sustainable, which is also going to bring value so that when it does come time to sell, there's a real valuable asset there to sell. So we're linking to that. I'll link to the books, The One Thing, Profit First, Prosperous Coach. Thank you for all of those suggestions. It was fantastic having you on, and I will definitely be seeing more of you on LinkedIn, and we will keep the conversation going offline.
Yeah, for sure. Again, I appreciate the opportunity. And yes, if there's advisors that just want to reach out, want to have a conversation, again, let's just get connected on LinkedIn. And I always say nothing ever happens unless it starts with a conversation, right? Yep. I mean, sales doesn't happen unless you have a conversation. So if there are advisors that want to just chat, let's have that conversation. So I appreciate this.
Yeah, and follow you on LinkedIn because you are out there practicing what you preach. So if nothing else, people can start to see what that looks like. So thank you so much. Thanks for listening to the Innovating Advice Show. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so make sure to connect with me on LinkedIn and shoot me a thought or two. Link to my profile is right below. Stay safe, stay well, and I look forward to hearing from you.